Melissa,
Sarah,
what are we doing today?
we're book bantering.
Woohoo!
All right, Sarah, I'm going to start us off. What are you reading?
I am reading a novel titled Animal by Lisa Taddeo. Just kind of started it. I'm not that far into it. Not sure how I feel about it yet. But I will say I did get this book because the book I read before this was another Lisa Taddeo book, and I liked it so much that I was like, oh, she's got another book. Let me pick this one up. So the book that I read before this was Three Women, which is a nonfiction book, came out in 2019. Of course, I was like up to my eyeballs in diapers and sleep deprivation in 2019. So was not even aware that that book came out, but apparently it was like very highly acclaimed and super popular, and so popular that now there's like a television series based on it, like a limited series. But this is her follow-up fiction book that was published in 2021, Animal. So yeah, not sure how I feel about it.
She's American, British?
She's American. I mean, she's a novelist and a journalist. And so the book that I read prior to Animal, Three Women, is like I said, it's a nonfiction book, and it's based on 8 years worth of research and interviews with 3 different women about their lives, and specifically about their desire and relationships and cultural pressures, expectations, and kind of what it is to be a woman, and 3 very distinct and different women. And it was super powerful, really well written, and affecting. Like I am constantly thinking about it, even though I finished it a couple weeks ago. Like it's always on my mind. I'm thinking about those real people that the book details, and their lives, and ways that I relate, and feelings that I have for them in terms of, like, you know, empathy and sympathy and, you know, just curiosity. But yeah, this book is it's different. The jury is a bit out on it, especially because I'm not that far into it.
Right. And you didn't have like a buffer between the 2 Lisa Taddeo books?
I didn't, because I liked that first book so much, and I looked it up at our local library. It was there. So I was like, I'm just going to go and get that book right away. So maybe it would have been better to have a buffer, but I mean, they're 2 different types of books. So we are recording this in November, and, you know, we're talking about nonfiction November, which that Three Women book fit into very nicely. And I do kind of wish I had maybe gotten another nonfiction book. I specifically, I don't know, I'm laughing. It's not that ridiculous, but there was the Lisa Marie Presley, her daughter, Riley Keough, just published her, I guess, memoir of her mother's that she finished after her mother had passed away. And I've kind of read and seen a couple things on that. And so that's a book I kind of was interested in reading about. I kind of wish that I had gotten my hands on that.
That feels like a perfect book for you to put on your Christmas list too. I can see that being like a good over the Christmas break read.
Yeah, possibly, for sure. But I am also like, I've made a lot of headway with my reading over the last couple months. Like I really stalled out over the summertime, and I think I can get to 30 books, which I didn't even think I was going to get to like 20 books, but like at this summer, because I was only like 12 books in as of like July. So I've really upped the ante. And I think I'm maybe at like 24, 25 books right now. So I'm just like, I got to plow through and get to this imaginary number that I didn't even have set at the beginning of the year. But I'm just like, I think I could do this. I think I could get there.
You going to set a reward for yourself? If you make it to like whatever an imaginary number, set it the day before, achieve it on the last day of the year, and then celebrate.
I am one of these people who, unfortunately, fortunately, am constantly rewarding myself for like everything. Like every time I leave the house, I have to reward myself with like an iced tea from Dunkin' Donuts.
Like I'm always pretty low bar reward though. Like I think you could, you know, go for like a bubble tea even.
Yeah, but no, I'm always looking for excuses to reward myself for just like accomplishing like the most menial and everyday of tasks. So certainly if I get to 30 books, like maybe I'll come up with something.
maybe I'll try to come up with something for you.
I'll
Beyond
keep
a
you
green
updated
tea.
too, but I am open to ideas. So yeah.
I always said like I have a lot of hair. Like I have just such thick hair.
Beautiful. Just
Thank you.
Lustrous. Is that even a word? Illustrious is a word, but
Luscious?
Luscious?
I don't know.
Luscious. Your hair, luscious locks
I
over
think
there.
what you're looking for, the adjective that's very complimentary that you're looking for to describe me, I think is probably luscious.
Definitely.
But it takes forever to get it cut or to get it colored. Like I'm committed for like 3 hours.
Mm-hmm.
And I just do not make time for this. I'm like, I don't know. If there's 3 hours on like a Saturday morning, I do not want to be sitting indoors in someone's like chair. My hairdresser is lovely. I love to chat with her and stuff, but it's like, if I want to get my hair cut, I want it like spontaneously. I'm like, I have nothing else planned. I want to be out of the house. Let's do it now. But I have to plan in advance to do this. Anyway, so I always say I'll get like a cut and color, like a way I'll reward myself. So I just never, ever do it. I'm like, oh, I never actually accomplished that. I never did. So I guess that's why I didn't get my hair done. But I just really need to stop setting like insane goals that I'm never going to achieve, all for like what is basic hygienic maintenance. Like, I'll go to the dentist. I'll get my teeth cleaned just as soon as I meet that reading goal.
I'll get a physical. I'll get a pap smear.
Everyone should get their pap. Just a little PSA there.
Very important. Very important. Yeah, I'm like so overdue to get my hair done. Like I was supposed to get it done, like highlighted and cut over the summer. And I ended up, like essentially double booking myself. And so I still went to the appointment and I got my hair highlighted, but I was like, there's no time to do the cut too. And I like left with wet hair. Like I was just like, the highlights are important. I want to keep this up. And then that was in like maybe July, and I have not done anything to my hair since. And now like all the highlights are grown out and I'm like in desperate need of like it getting cut because it hasn't been cut since maybe like April.
Your hair also looks lovely. And I did notice it was a little bit longer, but I wondered if it was deliberate. And actually, there is a connection here because I cut my hair just before the Boston trip.
You did. I was going to say with your bangs.
And I even deliberately told her, I was like, give me bangs to force me to come back here more often. Like that they would go into my line of vision and I would get so frustrated it would come back. Didn't work. I powered through the awkward phase of them in my eyes, and now they're just like another layer of my hair. I also love how hard I laughed when you said I left with wet hair. And I was just like, this is something I really think like a little window into the world of women that men like, I mean, well, Tom is completely bald anyway, so he doesn't have any real relationship to like hairstylist anecdotes. But like, that is just so silly to me. Like, and I left with wet hair. Like, what? You left with wet hair from the hairstylist? I'm surprised she even let you, that she wasn't like, whoa.
She was like, okay. I was like, I'm
policy.
so sorry. I have a conflict. I really need to get back to work. She's like, well, you have a choice. You can either get your hair highlighted or cut with the amount of time. Cause I was like, I have an hour. Cause normally I'm there like 2.5 hours. It's a long time. Josh does have hair. It's terrible because he'll get his hair cut and I'm like, oh, did you get your hair cut? And he's like, yeah, like 2 weeks ago. And I'm like, okay. Well, it looks good. But anyway, so he gets his hair cut and we have a good friend. Her name is Emily. I think she may listen here and there. So shout out to Emily. But Emily like is a very low maintenance gal, but like just so like naturally pretty. And like she can like just pull off like a low maintenance look like. And she gets her hair cut at the same place that Josh does. It's a salon. It's not like she goes to a barber shop. And her hair is like, like a little bit over her shoulders. But it takes like 10 minutes to cut her hair. Josh will be like, because they've sometimes like ended up, their appointments have kind of matched up. And he's like, Emily got her hair cut and it was less time than me. And he was like really upset that she got it out more efficiently than he did because he prides himself above all on like efficiency. And I think, and when I'm like a 2.5 hour hair getting done, like appointment, and he's just like, well, Emily only takes 10 minutes. So
that's exactly where my mind went. I was like, the Emilys of the world need to not be going home immediately after these 10-minute haircuts because the rest of the husbands.
I hope she treats herself. I hope she finds an excuse to go and do something else because she was so efficient with her own haircuts. So
My
Wow.
reading is insane right now. And I don't mean that
Yeah.
in like a self-congratulatory way. It's a little haphazard. Can I tell you about it?
Oh, please tell me about this. How can it be haphazard? Yeah.
How is this so, Melissa? How is this so? It's not like stressing me out, but I feel like I have like a stovetop
Mhm.
that I've got like just all these different
Oh,
burners
pot.
going at like different temperatures, and I'm trying to stir all of them. And I'm like, I just can't wait for all these soups to be done. So that's how I feel about these books. Okay, so pitch again, these are my 4 burners. This is what I got going. So I finished whatever book I was reading last, which is it's great that I can't even remember what it is because that must have been memorable. So I went straight into Sally Rooney's Intermezzo because we had done the
Mhm.
episode and I wanted to like join you in that. So I am enjoying Intermezzo. I'm not going to get into this in detail, but I'm not so sucked in that I'm like really,
Flying
really
through it.
immersed in this and I'm not flying
Mhm.
through it. And I have like attributed this to the fact that I feel like your reading scenario for this book was perfect.
It
The
was.
fact that you were like, I have this one day, I am in this world. It's you and me, Sally. Let's take this trip to St. John's. But trying to like steal away to read like 10 pages here, 10 pages there, I'm finding it like a little bit hard to like really get in there. But that's okay. I generally speaking always have an audiobook and a physical book going because they serve different purposes. So my audiobook is currently Sharp Objects by Gillian Flynn.
Ah,
Have
okay.
you read that?
Oh yeah.
Oh, really? Okay. Well, we can definitely reconnect about that. I wasn't sure. Have you seen the movie?
Yes.
Okay.
I'm big on that. Like I'm big on like if I read a book and I know there's a movie, I'm like, I gotta consume this as quickly as
Ah.
possible. Almost as like a post-mortem after I've read
Mm.
the book. Then it like helps me process the book a little bit more, or I'm like comparing and contrasting and what do I like better. So yeah, 100%.
When it comes to audiobooks, I have a bit of a policy that I will not spend money on them. Not for any real reason other than they're just existing in my brain. Like I'm listening to them, it's fine, but I'm not really invested in the audiobooks, generally speaking. And Tom has like this crazy amount, like his bookshelf on Audible is insane. So I'm like, there's always going to be something I can find in there. So we had talked a lot about Gone Girl when I had read Fates and Furies.
Right.
And I've never read anything by Gillian Flynn. So when I saw that one in the list, I was like, yeah, sure, I'll download that one because it was already there.
Mhm.
It's good. I am a weird soul, I think, for these like kind of icky books. They kind of gross me out. I'm like, I don't like how I feel. Like, I don't like how much I question what is going on in that person's brain to be like, and this is a spoiler for the book, I think, but like that someone would be like, let's pull her teeth out. I don't like that there's people in the world that are just thinking this and then turning it into books and millions of us are like, that's so good. Let's make a movie out of it. Like, it's just weird. Yeah.
Yeah, I can see that. It's not a feel-good read, Melissa, that's for sure.
No. So that one's going on in the audio
Mhm.
environment. So then Violet says to me one day in passing about something about Hunger Games. I have literally kept my box set of the Hunger Games books since before she was born, because in my mind I was like, I'm going to
One
read this
day.
again with my kids someday.
Mhm.
When she was like talking about the Hunger Games, I was like, how do you know the Hunger Games? I mean, she is in grade 6. Like, I don't know why this was like surprising me so much. She's like,
Mhm.
people talk about it at school. I was like, oh, maybe we should read it. And then she was like, I would be allowed to read the Hunger Games? And I was like, yeah, I guess so. If other people are reading it. Now, to be fair, I think they've watched it. And I was like, well, that's not how this family rolls, sweetheart. She'll be reading the original text by Suzanne Collins before the film adaptation. Thank you very much. So anyways, then of course, I was like, okay, so I guess we'll do it as like, and we do this from time to time, like kind of read out loud and everyone takes a turn or whatever. So I was like, oh, let's do that with the Hunger Games. Meanwhile, I guess I held off on Violet listening to it or reading it or whatever until grade 6. Douglas, grade 4. I'm like, hop on the couch and read it with the family. So that's also another book that like a long format book that I'm also in that world. So my bandwidth is like a little bit thinner that I'm like, okay, I'm in like, what is it? Virginia with the Gillian Flynn stuff. I'm in Ireland with Sally Rooney. I'm in this fictional Panem world with the Hunger Games, but I'm still keeping a lid on all the pots. Nothing's burning, nothing's overflowing. So I say, if I've got these 3 under control, hand me another saucepan. Let's get this 4th pot running.
Oh, God.
Because as everyone knows, if you're a reader and your book that you ordered from another library shows up, you're like, Off we go.
I gotta read this. I
I
gotta
gotta
get
read
it
this.
back on time.
Well, and to be fair, I don't think this book's like in huge demand at this point because it's from 2009
Oh,
and
yeah.
there's no lineup for this book, but it's just this fourth pot on the burner now that I'm like, well, of all of them I should be prioritizing, it's probably this one so that I can at least, sort of clear my debts with the library. So, this book has like a bit of a history in my life. When I was living in Korea in 2009, was like kind of when podcasts were sort of just becoming like a thing. And I remember having like this crappy little iPod Touch or something. It was before iPod Touch. It was like an iPod Shuffle. Like it was just like a tiny little device. And so I used to like plug it into my computer. And because we were living away, I would download all of the week's episodes of Q. And at that
Ah,
time,
I
it was,
remember your
yes,
affinity for Q. Mm-hmm.
loved Q. And I mean, Jian Gomeshi was the host at that time. So that's a whole other episode. But so I remember at that time, he had this guy on. It was this journalist who had written a book about raising a child who had exceptionalities. He was a disabled boy. At that time, I wasn't a parent. So thinking about reading a book about parenting a child with disabilities, I was interested enough that here we are in 2024, it was still in the back of my mind. So fast forward, one of my very, very dear friends, Jennifer, who's like avid listener, she's listened to all of our podcasts. So I'm sure she's listening to this one. She is a mother of a child with disabilities. And so we talk a lot about books and we talk a lot about like finding relatability with characters. And like sometimes if you read something that really connects with your life, it just helps you kind of like understand your own situation or at least feel like validated by how it's been represented in this book or in a book. And she's a reader and she's like, it's so funny to me that there's not more books in like fictional contexts about families where someone in the family has a disability. She's like, there's actually funny moments. It's not like we just live in silence and, some sort of somber tone all the time. There's a lot of like humor in what the realities of our life are. So I tried to find something else. Like, I really want to find a book for her that she could read, but everything's a memoir. But I all along was remembering The Boy in the Moon, which is the book by Ian Brown that was on Q back in 2009. So when I couldn't find anything, I was kind of keeping it on carrying on with the kitchen metaphor. It was on the back burner.
Oh,
thank you. So when I couldn't find anything else, I was like, I'm going to request The Boy in the Moon and read that. So just a bit of a sidebar anecdote here. I couldn't log in for some reason to the university website. This is not a comment on the university website. It's a comment on me. It was 100% user error. So I just was like, Tom, can you request me this book? So then it came into the library. It was one of those, like the dust jacket was off. So it was just like a plain cover. So I go down to the library, I grab it from the librarian. And I'm just looking at this plain cover. And then I open it and I start reading it. I'm like, this is really not what I thought it was going to be. And then I realized this is a different book. This is
God.
like The Boy in the Moon. Again, it was Irish. And I was like, I'm sure this is a lovely book, but I've got a lot of things on the go. The burners are just about full. I have one more spot. I am sorry, whoever you are in Ireland, this Boy in the Moon's going to have to wait. So then the other one came in. It is so good. It has kind of taken precedent over Intermezzo at this point, which surprised even me. I'm so interested in how he's articulating this. And I can't wait to just find snippets of it to share with Jennifer, because so much of what he says, I'm like, this would resonate so much with her. She said like similar things, but then the way he illustrates them, I just know that she'll just have such an affinity for this writer and their situation. It is so, so good. Like I can't say enough about it. So those are my 4 books. It got a little out of hand. It will be until I get them all done. But I'm a bit of a scattered mess, but that's what I'm reading.
Well, what a joy, though, the fact that this book, you read it with this intention of thinking about a friend. And I'm sure you probably wanted to like read it before you recommended it to her. But the fact that you're really finding joy out of reading it is wonderful. And I'm sure she'll appreciate that, and being able to talk about it and anything that you share. I mean, it's a lot, for sure, to have 4 books on the go. But I know you can pull it off. Even the idea of having 4 books on the go and understanding your situation, like I'm not one to do that. The only time I would have really ever done that would be being forced to when we were in school. and we were taking like several different classes where we had books that we had to read for them. But as a hobby, I'm a one book at a time. And even like audiobooks, like it's so interesting. When I did my trip up to Quebec, I drove, and I was by myself, which was glorious, by the way, like 7 hours in a car by myself. Like I know for some people that would be like a nightmare. Like they'd be like, I'm going to be so bored. But I was like, this is great. Just me in the open road. And
you should have been a trucker.
Good, I know. In another life, I could totally see it. But I had downloaded like some audiobooks. I don't know if I'm a real audiobook person to begin with. And then I was also reading a book. I brought a book with me, and like the idea of like having to split myself between two different like fictional worlds, I find it hard because I really like to be immersed in whatever I'm reading, and having to do that in all of these different worlds, like that's a hard one for me.
It has definitely happened that I'm like, I thought that character was like whatever, and then I'm like, oh, that was the other book. Like I do sometimes have trouble delineating, but I think one thing I've found interesting is that like it's not like I strategically chose the books that I'm concurrently reading.
It just happened.
But also it's really difficult to not then compare them. So it's not like, that someone assigned two books and was like, I want you to read these books in tandem because they speak to one another or something. Like it's not the case. They just at random became sort of two that I'm reading at the same time, but my brain is making the connections between them. And obviously, like I do really like the Sally Rooney book. Like I am enjoying Intermezzo. And I do think that once I kind of really get in the groove with it, I'm probably just going to cruise through. But obviously, like the types of problems that her characters are dealing with, and therefore that she's sort of bringing to the reader, are such different life challenges than what Ian Brown's talking about with his son's like extreme challenges in terms of his life and his daily life, right? And so it's hard to not be like, the whole millennial existential crisis, it's completely valid. It is important. These are conversations we need to have, and we need to be aware of like the significance of anxiety and mental health. But it's really weird to read them alongside, this man talking about like he cannot make sense of what goes on in his son's mind and how important it is to him. The subtitle is A Father's Search for His Disabled Son, because he just wants to know if he even has an inner world. Like, can he process what he's doing in a way that he has interpretations of it and that he questions things and has curiosities and what that means. And so it's so complex and it's so beautiful and it's so driven by love. So it's really hard to not be like, this feels a lot more heavy than some of the things that some of these characters are dealing with. And to go back to the whole humor piece, it's really resonated with me about how Jennifer was saying, like, there's a lot of humor in our lives, and I think people assume reading something like The Boy in the Moon would just be so monotone in like this somber kind of way. And it's like he takes this super heavy thing and tries to bring light to it. And in some ways, I feel like Sally Rooney brings kind of light things and tries to bring weight to it. And I'm like, these tones are just like mismatched for me. Yeah. But not to say one is better than the other, but again, just like that sort of different comparison, because I happen to be reading them at the same time.
Yeah, I didn't even think about that. And then you've got like the two other books where it's just like murder and like abusive, like actually, like, because it really deals with Munchausen's by proxy, Sharp Objects, right? Like, how far are you into this? Spoiler alert.
It's the Munchausen by proxy. That's what I was thinking all along as well. I'm not sure what you're talking about.
Okay, so in Sharp Objects, you've got the journalist, the main character journalist. She goes back to her hometown. She had been living in like Chicago.
Yes.
I don't know. Wow, I can't believe I remember this. And she's investigating because there's been a series of murders like of young girls, correct? And their teeth have been pulled out. That was like one of the like that's
well established.
that we know. That is solid. But she's also dealing with like, I think I just spoiled something. But anyway, and it's her hometown. And so her mother, who she has like an estranged relationship with, and she had a sister that died. I totally just spoiled something. So ignore that.
Not yet. I know everything that you've said so far.
Yeah. But I think she suspects that maybe her mother may have not have been a great mother.
Oh, okay. Okay. Yes. So we should cap it there. I have
Yeah.
already been suspicious of this.
Okay.
But now I see it's
Yeah.
I suspect that if I were to Google by Munchkin pro proxy or whatever, I know that's not what you
Munchausen's
said.
by proxy. Yeah. It's like a very different, I mean, it's just a totally different type of book than either of those, dealing with like, it's dealing with relationships, but also like the most dysfunctional of families.
Yeah.
And yeah. And then you've got the Hunger Games, which is fantasy ultimately. And yeah,
Yeah.
but talk about like four very distinct and different books and different genres, really. You really have very different types of pots on on that stove. You got frying pans, you've got
That's right.
boilers, you've
I
got
got a
a kettle,
goulash.
you got
I've got a goulash, a jambalaya, a curry. It's just everything.
yeah.
You and I were talking about this before, and this might be a good segue of like, I could read these four very different things and like them all, right? Like, even though I'm saying, oh, Sally Rooney is like bringing weight to something light and he's putting light on something heavy, it's like, I can still like them both. And we were talking about whether or not we would, try to ever answer this question of like, what is your favorite book? And it's kind of impossible, right? Because you can like a lot of books and there's no need to pick a favorite, right? Like we don't have to do that, but that it is hard to ever sort of be like, but this is the book that most defines what I like in a book.
Yeah. And I feel like book reading is like, it's a lifelong activity, and the relationships that we have with books change just as we change as people. So like for me, when I first started really reading books was when I was probably like 10 or 11. And that's when it really started for me. And like the types of books I would have read then versus what I read when I was a teenager and then in my 20s and my 30s and now in my 40s. I mean, like I definitely am on, and I feel like I want to save this for when we eventually talk about all fours, but I think I'm on like a kind of an interesting journey as like a 42-year-old female reader with some of the books I've been interested in reading this year, as opposed to like what I would have listened to as a 32-year-old or a 22-year-old read. We said I don't really enjoy audiobooks. But yeah, and so the idea of a favorite, like that would almost be like you've remained static as a reader, like that what you read is like that hasn't changed. And I certainly can't pick a favorite book. I do know like that there are books that you've gone back to and like you've read multiple times, like books I know like around Christmas time you have books that you read every year, and it's just kind of part of your life. And I've definitely had books that I've reread, but I don't know that I even have one that I've like gone back to more than twice. You know what I mean? It's nothing that I'm like every single year. My friend Missy, not to be confused with Melissa, but I've mentioned her before on the podcast. She's a huge book reader, has been forever. One of the things we initially bonded over when we were like 14 and first met. What was the book? Oh, Catcher in the Rye. She said that there was a while there where like she would read that book every single year, reread it.
A book that I do go back to, obviously small things like these, I do read every year, but I think only for the last 3 years or something. So it's not like a super long tradition. The Handmaid's Tale, like if pressed, I would probably just say The Handmaid's Tale is my favorite book because like it's so artistically and poetically written. I just love the way it sounds in my mind. I love what it does. So if pressed, I would probably say that book. But yeah, it's funny when you were talking about like sort of coming into reading as like an 11 or 12-year-old or 10 or 11 or 12-year-old. I think about in those days of my reading experience, it was almost like where I went after I became too old to play make-believe. So it was sort of like I loved playing house and Barbies and that kind of like pretend world. But then you hit that preteen slice of time when you're like, I can't pretend, you can't be that vulnerable to be like play acting. But then when you're reading, you're sort of, it's that you want to be the person in the book. Whereas now I feel like I read for escapism. Like, I don't want to be the person in this book. I'm happy to be myself, but I want to kind of experience other things.
Yeah.
You kind of go out of yourself instead of trying to be in the book. But yeah, you've talked about liking Sweet Valley High.
Oh my God. Yeah. And that was like prepubescent Sarah, where I was like really just like kind of discovering my hormones, because there was like I still think about it sometimes. Like that book, like I was reading that when I was like 11 and 12. I remember my friend Sarah Dodge, who also sometimes listens to this podcast, we both like had and would trade back and forth like Sweet Valley High books. And there was like hundreds or at least 100 of those books. There's so many of them. And about the twins, like Elizabeth and Jessica Wakefield, I believe their names were. They were like, I mean, really talk about like unhealthy body image. Like they were described at the very beginning of every single book as like perfect size 6, blonde, tan California girls. And I was like, this is what I need to try to be, which I will never be. I'm not.
No amount of highlights.
No amount of blonde highlights will make me Jessica or Elizabeth. But there was like a lot of dating, and there was like some like, I don't know if they had sex, but they definitely like got close. Like there was a specific scene, I can't remember which of the Sweet Valley High books it was, but it was like one of the twins was in a hot tub with like I know, with one of like the studs from their like high school, Sweet Valley high school class. And like essentially like he took off her bikini top, and like I remember I know. And I remember the description of like she could feel like the water swirling around her breasts as the bikini top like kind of like came off of her. And I remember like reading that at the time thinking like, whoa.
Your face is flush right now. I am like watching the red just further on your face.
But yeah, I thought at the time, like, I can't wait to have that feeling. And like anytime I've been in a hot tub, I'm just like, that will play in my head. And I'm just like, I know what would happen.
I also have a great sexualized tub story to tell, which this is wonderful. I read a book a couple of years ago called Even Weirder Than Before by Susie Taylor. And in the book, the girl has sort of a sexual awakening, if you will, in a bathtub because, you know, water flow, water pressure, swirling of the breasts, of the water on the breasts. So I had the lovely pleasure of meeting Susie Taylor like last week.
No way.
Yeah. And obviously I had to lead with this story.
As only you can, Melissa.
Yeah. So I was like, because I wanted her to sign my copy of the book. And it looked really pristine, which I felt really guilty about because I was like, it looks like I never read this book because it was in such good shape. And I'm like, I know for a fact I read this book because I read it in the bathtub. And I remember being like, I can't believe I'm reading this scene in a bathtub while I am in a bathtub. And so I was like, I'm surprised there's not like water stains on this book. So of course, this is what I'm telling Susie when I meet her. I'm like, I know this book looks like I never read it, but I can assure you I did because, and then I tell her this story, and her wife was with her and was like, oh, the bathtub scene. I was like, this is a great moment. I was very, very happy to have shared it with them. But a lot can happen in a bathtub.
Yeah, or a hot tub. Never forget it.
That book would not fly today, but they've all been adapted. I don't know if they're the same stories, but you can buy the graphic novel versions for kids.
I would like to see the graphic novel of the originals.
Did you read The Hunger Games?
I did. I read those books like 10 years ago, whenever they were out and popular, but I don't really feel the need to revisit them. I mean, I would totally read them with William next year when he's 6 now. I'm just kidding. Yeah. But
I'll let you know how much it disturbs Douglas as an 8-year-old. And if it works out, it'll probably be another few years before I'll know the full gravity of this. 2008 is when the first one came out.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So I totally, because I definitely did Hunger Games. I did the Twilight series.
That I did not do.
Oh my God. It's an interesting read.
Will it be a lovely experience for me to share with my daughter? Maybe our next books will be the Sweet Valley High, and I'll be like, hot tubs are generally not this sexy, sweetheart.
I just want to save the disappointment. Yeah.
I need to give you a lesson about yeast infections.
I would say Twilight, I mean, there's some really unhealthy relationships that are modeled in that book, like the Bella Edward, which was very romanticized at the time. And it's so funny that we're actually talking about this because the book 3 Women, one of the people that you learn about, one of the 3 women, her name is Maggie, and she essentially is groomed by her high school teacher when she's 17 and has a romantic relationship with him. But that book, at one point, she shared with her teacher that Twilight was her favorite book, and she like lent him a copy, and he like gives her copy back with like all these sticky notes and like underlined passages. And in it. So yeah, I would say like
Mhm.
Twilight is a model for unhealthy relationships. So read it as like a precautionary tale to be like,
Right.
this is not what you should be striving for, Violet.
Okay, so when we get together for the next one, we're talking about, well, possibly 3 women. I don't know if I'm going to get to it. I got too many burners going. I'm going to have to get a hot pot. But part of why I feel the pressure of getting these 4 done is because I also have what I hope will be my holiday read.
Oh,
The Deal of a Lifetime and Other Stories by Frederick Bachman. I am chasing that Small Things Like These dragon like real bad. So I'm hoping something in here, because he's like Nordic and they're short. So I'm hoping something in there will kind of bring me that same joy.
feeling.
Even the font is really nice, if I can be so bold.
I kind of want to put this out there for our listeners because I have such a hard time finding holiday books to read. I want to get recommendations. So maybe this is something that we can kind of put out, do like maybe a little social media. If anybody has a really, really good holiday book that is not a romance Hallmark movie-esque, because I don't want anything to do with that. Sorry. No offense if that's like your jam. It's not my jam. Don't want to read it.
No, I don't
But
want
if there's-
anything with a small business. I don't
No.
want any tycoons, no
no
bakeries,
princes, no big city woman going back to her small town and meeting
Christmas
a
tree
Christmas
farms.
farm.
No.
No.
Yeah.
I want something set in the holidays that gives off the holiday feel that is going to really kind of get me into the spirit. So any recommendations out there? I want it because I don't know. I
know.
mean, last year I poured over lists of recommended books and like just did not work for me. So we're gonna put that out there, see what happens.
Always delightful to banter with you.
It's been a slice, and looking forward to the next time.
You know it. Toodaloo.
Bye.